All right, welcome to Ask Me Anything Live for Matthew Inductive Bible Study. I want to give some tips and I want to answer any questions that you do have. I want to start with some basic feedback on how to improve some work. I want to start with a question I received online first, and the person asked, how much is too much? And then they wrote, in my head, I'm saying that I'm going deep, but there has to be some level to balance out the assignment and time involved before it becomes excessive on my part, if that makes sense. And the answer is, yeah, that makes perfect sense, because in a sense, one of the issues is just flat out time. Is you have to make inductive Bible study work in terms of the amount of time that you have allocated. So part of inductive Bible study or any exegesis is going to be time management. Now, let me say this in two ways. The person who was writing in, who's been sitting in some pretty long papers, is struggling with, I can work on this forever. And that's what I like to see in persons. I've been getting some really short assignments that don't look like you put a lot of time in it. So the person who's asking when is too much, the answer is, once you hit about 8 hours on any assignment this semester, you need to think about, I need to land the airplane now, because all of the assignments, this is important, and this will be true for the rest of your life. Every time you study the Bible, you can literally spend the rest of your life studying whatever passage you're actually looking at. So there's always going to be more that can be said. So you could write a 25-page paper on any of these passages, and you would have just been scratching the surface. There's always more research to do. There's always more observations to make. And so what we're trying to get to is, you want to get to the point of at least where you're feeling the law of diminishing returns. If you invest 6 to 8 hours on most passages, you're going to come up with something that's substantive. So in a sense, there's always more that can be said, but as long as you're putting the time in, you want to allocate your time to that. And, and if you're looking for some basic tips, it depends on the assignment. So this next week, the next assignment's due is going to be on the sower, and I'm doing the survey stuff for you. That's all you're doing is an interpretation. So that's probably a 6-hour assignment, a 6 to 8 hour assignment by itself. And so if you find yourself going way over that to answer the 2 questions that I asked, you want to start slowing down. Now, on the other hand, if you're trying to do this in an hour, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it won't be very good. And you're probably not pushing yourself far enough on it. So you want to put the time in simply to get the repetitions on that. And a kind of a rule of thumb, the last couple of assignments for the class, and we do have, if you look ahead, there's we just have a survey of 16, 1 to 20. That's probably a 3 to 4 hour assignment, maybe even faster if you're getting really good at survey. The assignment after that is just an interpretation of 16, primarily 24, with just the verses around it as kind of the background. That's probably a 4 to 6 hour assignment. You might be able to stretch that out, but the last 2 assignments are going to be survey and interpretation, sort of like you did on the text 9:35 to 11:1. And in those cases, when you need to do a survey and an interpretation, you still want to think roughly 8 hours of work. And so you're trying to push yourself through the survey. So say 2 to 3 hours on the survey, and that saves then, roughly about 5 hours for the interpretation. Those are good rules of thumb on the time, and those are reasonable. So again, be fair to yourself this semester. Make sure you allocate enough time to knock out the assignments. Again, inductive Bible study does tend to be weekly. Make sure if you're getting behind that you work on the next assignment first before you try to go back, because it's important to be on time. All right, so that's that one. Let me say a couple other things that would help to improve work for everybody. Again, these aren't going to be necessarily applicable to every single person, but when I went over 8:1 to 9:34, I jotted down at least 8 things that I'd like everybody to think, actually 9 things I want everybody to think about. The first thing is, and some of you did this, some of you didn't, make sure you're writing at the top of the interpretation the question that you're actually working on. So write out your interpretive question. The reason that this is important is because, remember, questions are what's going to lead you to meaning, and your brain will focus on looking for answers to whatever question you bring to the text. So keeping that in mind will help you then lay out your observations and your inferences. And remember, in this case, once you've asked an interpretive question, your inferences will be partial answers to the question that you're trying to answer. And those questions will help you to focus your mind to look for data that's going to help you to answer it. Second thing I want you to do, and this is about observations, is focus on the basics. I have a sense that several folks, this is typical, all of us want to desire to achieve some kind of deep, penetrating insight into the text. But the problem is you're not going to get to the deepest insights unless you're willing to literally kind of grind through the mundane parts of the text. So and the temptation for a lot of folks is you're just making one observation on a verse. I think you ought to be thinking about, I ought to make 10 observations on every verse. Again, I'm throwing a number out there, but a lot of that's just going to be the basics. Describe what's there. Don't just quote the text. Say something about the text. Label it. Dissect it. Paraphrase it. But make yourself say the mundane pieces, and you'll see as you pile up sort of typical observations that you'll begin to see get deeper insights. But try to prove me wrong, you won't get the deep insights unless you go through the mundane ones first. And then nuts and bolts things. Make sure that you, with every observation, that you list out your verse references too. So don't just make an observation. Make sure you put, what verse it's referring back to. That's going to help you to be able to reuse your work later on by labeling things. Because I was reading some people's papers and I really had no idea where the observation was coming from. Now, in terms of questions, don't feel like you have to answer a bunch of different questions. It's better to go deep in answering one important question than it is to rush and answer multiple questions in a superficial way. So it's better to go deep answering thoroughly one question than to try to answer a bunch of questions in a superficial way. Remember, what I'm looking at in the assignments is not that you've answered every single possible question. What I'm looking for, I'm looking at your method and I'm looking for the depth that you're able to go. So it's better to go deep answering one question than to spend time answering multiple ones in a superficial way. It's also important that you show your work. I said this in class, but think of IBS papers as a math paper. And in a math class, like if you ever took calculus, literally it could take an entire page of paper to do one calculus problem just to get the answer. Now, and obviously in math, you're hoping to get the exact right answer. IBS doesn't always work like that because there's multiple possible interpretations. But here's the key thing. I actually don't care what your conclusion is. Let me say it again. I don't care what your conclusion is. I want to see how you got it. And so you can have a conclusion that completely matches what I found, but if I don't see how you got it, I'm not going to grade that well, and because I'm wondering how you got to where you are. So I need to see your work. So show your work, move step by step and determine it by determine it until you draw your conclusion. So the conclusion shouldn't be until the very end of your work. And by the way, the last thing you should do is write a final synthesis. This is where the work should end. So you should show your work all the way through, and then whatever answer, and maybe you have more than one option, and you're going to lay that out and say why you think one conclusion is better than the other. Your final thing on your paper should be your synthesis. Some of you are doing synthesis and then doing commentary work. The commentaries are the last part of the showing your work part. So your commentaries are the last thing that you do before writing your final synthesis. Now, there's some information and videos on how to use commentaries, but in essence, what you're doing here, after you've done your contextual work, any word studies, historical background, original language, comparing of translations, looking at parallels, all the different kinds of evidence that we can bring to bear, the last thing you're going to want to do is look at 2 to 3 commentaries. And what you're looking for, and it's going to be a dialogue, you want to write a short couple of sentences about each commentary, and you want to note how the commentary supports your position, if it does, how it challenges your position, if it does, and any kind of nuance or new information that you weren't aware of from your study that the commentary brings. And this should be about 45 minutes of your time, 30 to 45 minutes tops with the commentaries, but make sure you do something substantive with them. Show how they interact with your position that you've done. I'm going to come back to the commentaries in just a minute. Let me say a couple other things about observation. Now, one of the persistent problems, and I mentioned this in class, is when you're doing your observations, you want to avoid I, me, we, us language. And why is that? It's because you're making applications as soon as you say that. The text tells us we are supposed to do this. We're not in the text. When we're doing interpretation and inductive Bible study, we haven't got to the application phase yet. And so when we do interpretation, what we're doing is we're describing the world of the text itself. And so to get distance in this stage, make sure you're writing your observations in the third person. And I know this is going to be hard to do, but listen to me carefully. Don't assume it has any application to you at this point. Just describe what the text seems to be saying, and saying not necessarily to you. So use third person. So avoid the us language, because if you're already writing I, me, we, us, you've already collapsed the text and you're applying before you even understand what it's trying to say. So that's real important. Now, your observations, go observation to inference. Some of you, and actually a lot of the class, and this is good, are using the clarifying question, this is a 2-column format. Make sure you make observations and then clearly separate your inferences. You can stack them like I do in my work, or you can make columns if you want to in your word processor. And some of you are doing a 3rd column of questions. That's great, but make sure that you draw inferences now, because we already know what the interpretive question is. So this intermediate phase here, this 3-column format, is simply to help clarify your observation so that you can make an inference that tries to answer what? The interpretive question, not necessarily the question here. So if you're going to use a 3-column format, make sure you do that. You don't have to do any section where it's just observation and questions now, because I'm giving you the question to answer. And then the last piece, I want to go back to commentaries. Make sure that you use the best resources available. I had you purchase the Keener volume and the France commentary, so you'd have at least 2 resources. I warned in class, I don't want to see Matthew Henry, and I saw Matthew Henry in about 4 papers. That's completely unacceptable. And so don't even turn your paper in if you're going to use Matthew Henry, because I'm just saying, don't use it. Don't use any free resource off the internet. If you're going to look for, if you're not going to use Keener in France, go to Asbury Scholar, and I showed you how to use this in class, and there's a video, and make sure that you either use peer-reviewed scholarly articles or the commentaries that you can find through the library that are going to be academic. Because long term, I'm going to lower your grade if you persist to use non-academic materials for this class. If you have any questions about how good the stuff is, shoot me an email. Obviously, if you're waiting until the last second on Saturday, I'm not going to get back to you. But if you have any doubts about the resources that you're going to use, shoot me a note a couple of days in advance. And remember, most free resources are free for a reason. They're outdated or they're popular in nature. This is a graduate level class in biblical interpretation. And I don't know about you, when I think about the people that I want to preach to and communicate to, I want to bring them the absolute best insights that I can muster, not simply something that I found on the internet because I didn't take the time to carefully research it. Your folks long-term deserve better than that. And frankly, you deserve better than that. And so invest in learning how to use the best resources, because we live in a world that's desperate for the good news that's in the scripture, and we've lost scriptural memory. So so little popular resources aren't going to be the thing that's going to give you the depth that people are really going to look for in excellent biblical teaching and preaching. Anyway, those are the things that I wanted to go over that came out of the work for this week. And then we have a couple people that are here live. I think, Javon, you said you had a question. I don't know if I answered it already, and then I'll see if Terry has a question. Javon, do you have a question that you wanted to raise?
Let's see here. Let me look back on your screen. I think because so when I look at my paper, let me get it back up. My interpretation, it kind of looks like I have the questions listed, and then after the questions, I have my observations of the questions, I guess. Yeah. And then after that, I have then I wrote my paragraph.
Yeah. So what you'd want to do is when you're making observations, before you write the paragraph, think of your paragraph as going to be your final synthesis. I really want to see when you're making observations. So make some observations, but start drawing some conclusions. Those are going to be your inferences, and you can either do them again. You can literally make 2 columns on your paper, or you can make an observation or 2 or whatever, and then like on mine, I use little bullets to indicate when I'm making an inference. But draw some conclusions on the way. What that's going to do, help you methodologically, is sometimes after you've made an inference, even if it's rather insignificant, it's going to lead you to make a deeper observation. So that's kind of the process. When I was talking about focusing on the basics, begin to draw even some rudimentary inferences, and that'll help you to make deeper observations, which will lead to deeper inferences. And it's kind of a back and forth. So do some descriptive observing, but then make some inferences as you're going. And then that'll let you then draw a better synthesis at the very end. Okay.
Okay. So I understand my observation from the verse, my inference is going to be, is going to sound like
this suggests that, or something.
Okay. That to the question.
Yeah. Based on this observation, I infer that. You don't have to be that wooden and write those words out, but that's basically what you're doing. And then in some way, again, it's in some way your conclusion. And again, the observation is something that anybody that's reading the text would agree with.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're just drawing something a little deeper. That's in some way a
Hmm.
partial answer to the question. It
Okay.
may barely be an answer to
Hmm.
the interpretive question, but you're using that, the question that you're starting with,
Hmm.
and you're just gathering data that then you can pull together into a synthesis. And then this is just a contextual work. So that's the process of gathering evidence essentially. But
Yeah.
you make some smaller conclusions. Those are called inferences along the way, and that will help you.
So the inference is what I'm going to use to write my synthesis.
Yes and no. You're going to use both, but yeah,
Okay.
the inferences are going to be what's going to be the bigger, deeper meanings, and you'll
Hmm.
illustrate that with the observation. So it's both, but you need, but you
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
have inferences to write your synthesis. Yes.
Okay. Cool. 'Cause I think I was kind of doing my inference into the paragraph where
Yeah.
I should have did it first and then make the thing.
Yeah, because basically what you're doing, if you make some inferences along the way, that lets when you do the synthesis, then you're even making deeper level inferences.
Exactly.
Okay, you're getting the feel for it. Yeah, so it's just
Yeah.
show your work, grind it along through the passage, do the reps,
Hmm.
and then something really good will come out at the end.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. And then, so what if like the commentaries, if they don't, what if so okay, before the commentaries part, the question, I know you're giving us the question,
Yes.
but say if I say, okay, I'm going to do my inductive Bible study on my own,
Yes, which you will
um,
in the long term.
um, how do I pick that? How did you pick that question, or how do I pick that question? Does it matter what question, or would that come from my observation from the survey?
Yes, you kind of hit it. There's two ways when you're doing it on your own. Just remember inductive Bible study is observe, ask, answer, right? And so we
Hmm.
start in the two things of observation that you can do is you can do a survey
Hmm.
if we're going to do like a segment, and on the survey you're going to have structures, and
Yeah.
basically where my questions came from is I've made a judgment what the most significant structures are, and then I'm picking a strategic area, and I'm using the definitional questions from my survey, and usually having you start in a strategic area, basically. So that's one way. The other way is you decide you want to preach on a paragraph or whatever, and then you do a detailed observation where you ask all of the questions, and then you're going to pick two or three of the most significant questions that you asked right there, and that becomes your agenda. Those are two different ways. You can do a survey first, or you can do the detailed observation work on a smaller section first, and that'll generate questions for you long term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
All right. I got
And
about 5 minutes. I don't know if Terry had any questions or not. I'll see if you all don't have any more questions. I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording or whatever, and then we can see if there's anything else.
one question about the commentaries. What if the commentaries don't speak on the question
Yeah.
that we're talking about?
Yeah, and sometimes they won't. That's why it's important to use the better scholarly resources, because what you're going to find, if you do a good job on your observations and inferences, you'll have more than most popular commentaries we're even going to talk about. Right? And so sometimes it means you got to do a little bit more research if the commentary doesn't go into the depth that you've actually done. Right?
Hmm.
It could mean you're completely off the deep end. But if it sounds like mostly you aren't, and you just seen something, you may just have to do some more research, because again, you spend some time on the passage, and you're now coming to those commentaries, not as kind of a beggar hoping for some scraps. You're
Hmm.
coming as a conversation partner who's an interpreter in your own right, and you're coming to work with the commentator. So that is going to happen sometimes, and that's one of the outcomes of this class. You're going to find out that commentaries aren't the all-in be-all. Certain ones are better than others. Again, the France one's pretty thick, and Keener has a lot of good stuff too. But a lot of commentaries, they don't even talk about what you're talking about, and you're going to have to go find another commentary, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to thank both of you for jumping on here with me for a little bit today. Again, hopefully this was helpful. For those of you who are going to be watching this on video, we'll continue to do this. I'll do a couple more of these. Again, your next assignment isn't due for a couple of weeks now, so you have a little bit of a pause in the semester. So take advantage of that to kind of see where you've come from and start off the next assignment fresh. I'll have feedback on the work that you just turned in back by the end of this week, so I'll have plenty of time to implement any feedback that I have before your next paper is due. Again, the key thing, put the time in, it's worth it, and small actions done consistently over time yield spectacular results, and just live with the process and you'll be happy where you come out. Again, great to be your professor. If I can help you privately, we can do a Zoom chat one-on-one if we need to. Send me a note. I can talk to you. If you live close, you can come by the office, but let me know how I can help. And I want everyone to do really well. So I will see you next time. All right. Thank you guys for joining me. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great day. God bless.
You too.